amount of pressure that I feel, filling in for likes of Alex Bryan and Rod Strobel and Jody Wagner. My name's Howard Munson. I'm the Associate Vice President for Academic Administration at Walla University. I've been in that capacity since this summer. Before that, I have been teaching history at Pacific Union College for the last 12 years. I was a professor and chair of the history department there. And long before that, I was a freshman at Walla Walla College at the time, having grown up in Yakima, Washington, gone to Upper Columbia Academy, and then came here, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I fell in love with this building in its original form, with the members of the history department who were then housed here, and the archaeology department that was also housed here. I appreciate the improvements to the building that was definitely needed, but I do miss some of those feelings and those spaces that I was used to as a student because they no longer exist. That is for the best. So I was a history major and a biblical archaeology minor. That was as close as I could get to a history minor on top of a history major. My dad, the Howard Munson III, I'm the fourth. He's a Bible and history teacher for about almost 20 years in Yakima, Washington. And then that was in seventh and eighth grade, so he was in elementary, and then high school for Puget Sound Adventist Academy, where he's finishing up his 50th year of teaching this year, having been there for nearly 30 years. So I came by history naturally. Dr. Gottschall, who worked in this building teaching history, who many of you probably know, he was my mentor. Him and my dad had been college classmates here at Walla Walla when they were in college. So I'm very excited to be back, to be here with my wife, Brenda Munson, who works over at Providence Hospital as a nurse manager, son Lincoln Munson, who frequents this classroom. Younger brother Ronan Munson is over with the 7th and 8th grade Sabbath school class. And that's enough about me. What we have to look at today is Acts chapter 25. And we're continuing to follow Paul as he has come back to Jerusalem after a number of missionary journeys. He brought back with him money for the poor, and he also knew that he would be walking into a hornet's nest, and he was very quickly accosted in the temple and nearly torn apart by the Jews and had to be rescued by the Romans. So we have an interesting interplay where our main character, Paul, is variously at the mercy of the high priests and the Jewish leaders and the Roman government officials, and we're continuing in that story. So James, if you would be kind enough to read us into this chapter. Oh wait, I forgot to start with prayer. Pause on that. Looking out, and thank you, Gary, for joining us. I know your name. Would you be willing to start us off with prayer?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Lord, thanks for having patience with our tardiness this morning. And we appreciate the opportunity to get together, learn a little bit more about you, help us to see you and your character rightly through this discussion. In your name, amen.
Amen. All right, James.
3 days after arriving in the province, Festus went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, where the chief priests and Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus as a favor to them to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing an ambush to kill him along the way. Festus answered, "Paul is being held in Caesarea, and I myself am going there soon. Let some of your leaders come with me, and if the man has done anything wrong, they can press charges against him there." After spending 8 to 10 days with them, Festus went down to Caesarea. The next day he convened the court and ordered that Paul be brought before him. When Paul came in, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him. They brought many serious charges against him, but they could not prove them. Then Paul made his defense. I have done nothing wrong against Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there on these charges? Paul answered, I am now standing before Caesar's court where I ought to be tried. I have not done anything wrong to the Jews, as you yourself know very well. If, however, I am guilty of doing anything deserving death, I do not deserve to die, but if the charges brought against me by these Jews are not true, no one has a right to hand me over to them. I appeal to Caesar. After Festus conferred with his council, he declared, you have appealed to Caesar you will go. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea to pay their respects to Festus. Since they were spending many days there, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. He said, there's a man here whom Felix has left as a prisoner. When I went to Jerusalem, the chief priest and the elders of the Jews brought charges against him and asked he be condemned. I told them that it is not a Roman custom to hand over anyone before they have faced their accusers and have had an opportunity to defend themselves against the charges. When they came here with me, I did not delay the case, but convened the court the next day and ordered the man to be brought in. When his accusers got up to speak, they did not charge him with any of the crimes I expected. Instead, they had some points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a dead man named Jesus who Paul claimed was alive. I was at a loss how to investigate such matters, so I asked if he'd be willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial on these charges. But when Paul made his appeal to be held over to the emperor's decision, I ordered him held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear this man myself, he replied. Tomorrow you will hear him. The next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with a great pomp and entered the audience room with the high-ranking military officials and prominent men of the city. At the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, King Agrippa, and all of you who are present, you see this man, the whole Jewish community has petitioned me about him in Jerusalem and here in Caesarea, shouting that he ought to no longer live. So I found he had done nothing deserving death, but because he made his appeal to the emperor, I decided to send him to Rome. But I have nothing definite to write to his majesty about him. Therefore, I have brought him before all of you, especially before you, King Agrippa, so that as a result of this investigation, I may have something to write. For I think it is unreasonable to send a prisoner to Rome without specifying the charges against him.
All right, so it leaves us with not a clear conclusion. It really sets up the next chapter, but we have this chapter 25 to look at in detail. And this is what is the tagline after the Saltworks Sabbath school class, where real life meets theology, something like that. There's not a huge amount of theology for us to work with, to sink our teeth into in this particular chapter. But there is a lot of history that this chapter connects to. So when you're thinking about sections of the Bible that the Bible has been attacked, the Bible has been picked apart, people will say, well, what evidence do we have that this person was real, or that event happened, or that any of this is true? This whole entire thing could be made up. It's really important that Luke gives us chapters like this in Acts, where it connects to many points of history, many data points in history. We're not going to go through all of that history. I could spend way too long enjoying talking about that, but we'll look at some of the highlights. First of all, our setting. We are in Caesarea Maritime, which is this Roman colony on the coast of the Mediterranean. We are right up against it. We have an oceanfront view. Specifically within Caesarea Maritima, we're at the palace that has been built out on a promontory into the water just south of the artificial harbor that Herod the Great installed here with advanced Roman technology, the kind of cement that could chemically cure underwater. This port on a coastline that doesn't have a lot of natural harbors is the whole reason why Caesarea Maritima takes on such prominence. The Romans can run ships in and out of this protected port. It's just north of this palace. This palace built on this promontory where it is safe on three sides from attack by water, protected on land as part of the fortress wall fortifications that archaeologists have unearthed the foundations of what's left and can look at this. You can go and visit this coastline today. You can see what's left of this promontory, which is now basically taken down to the basic bedrock. But within that basic bedrock sticking out of the water, your eyes will immediately grasp that there is a perfect rectangle cut into that bedrock. This palace had a freshwater pool that was carved into the bedrock as this palace is sticking out into the coast. And this is where Paul has been a prisoner for the last 2 years. What do we know about Paul's experience these last 2 years in this very nice palace complex? What kind of prisoner is he from? This is asking you to reflect a little bit on what happened in the last chapter, if you remember.
House arrest.
House arrest,
Allowed to visit with his friends.
allowed to have friends come and visit, see to his basic needs. This isn't the worst form. He's not in a dungeon. He's under house arrest. Another way of phrasing this is that he's in witness protection. Now, in this case, the witness protection isn't protecting him by not knowing where he's at. The Jews very much know where he's at, but they simply can't get in to get him. The fact that it's been 2 years, it tells us some things about what hasn't happened while he's there. We have no details about those 2 years where we start as chapter 25. But what hasn't happened during those 2 years? We can make some good inferences on that.
So at least a judgment of what he's been done, nobody's made a decision what to do with him. Festus has passed it along to Felix, or around to me.
Felix has passed it on to
to
Festus.
Festus, right.
It's hard that they had names that start with the same letter and about the same length, and I certainly wish they were more distinctly different. Is there a hand over here?
Yeah, and Paul has not given in to bribing the officials.
He's not given in to bribing the officials. Felix here has held him this long and met with him frequently in the hopes that he would get a bribe. Now, why would Felix think that this guy, Paul, could supply him with a bribe that would make it worth holding him under house arrest, protecting him for 2 years?
I gotta wonder if they weren't kind of intrigued by him.
He's definitely an interesting person.
Not just a bribe, maybe they're actually intrigued by this guy.
He's well-versed in Jewish law, he's well-versed in Roman law, he's clearly a well-educated person. He's got some really interesting stories. Where did he get these stories from? What was he doing before he got here? There's a clue in what James just read about how the Jews frame Paul, this man who caused trouble all over the world. In order to cause trouble all over the world, you have to travel all over the world. And in his defense, Paul mentions, or his previous defense in the previous chapter, he's mentioned that he traveled extensively and that he brought back what to Jerusalem?
Gifts or money.
Gifts and money. So if you're a Roman official and you get wind of somebody who's traveled a lot and amassed wealth, and now they happen to be your prisoner, it's not illogical to assume that you could squeeze this person for who knows how much. The mystery that surrounds the long distance traveler who's loaded with treasure, you know how these often completely hyperbolized myths about anybody who's traveled a long distance and come back, well, they must have a huge treasure that they've hidden somewhere. So he's both seems to be entertained by him, but also hoping for that payoff. Now, the payoff doesn't come. We transition governors. What other motivation would Felix have had for holding him for 2 years? For delaying justice?
I think he would feel like if he did let him go, he would anger the Jews, and that would get him into trouble as being their governor.
Right.
So he's not willing to flip that page, he puts it off.
The majority of the population that Felix is tasked with ruling over. This is a job, you're working for the Roman Empire. Do you want a poor performance report when you're working for the Roman Empire? No. You can ride this thing up the ladder and benefit yourself. You can get personally wealthy and powerful off this. This is part of what the structure of the Roman Empire provide. But if you get on the wrong side of that, Romans are not known for their gentle treatment of people who don't make the cut. So Felix has to keep the Jews happy, the majority of his population, and they want Paul. So he's sitting on a powder keg, but the safest place for Paul is house protection, but it's also convenient for Felix, and that he gets to delay this issue. As long as Paul just sits still, it's not a problem.
I'm just wondering, I actually don't know the answer to this question. Do we know how politically prominent Christians were by that time? Were they
Not, as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, not very politically prominent. There's been a few individuals here and there, but within the Roman Empire, to have Roman officials who are Christian, if they are, they're keeping it very, very quiet.
so that wouldn't have been much
Probably
of a
a
factor?
handful of them. Felix is married to somebody else we're going to be talking about a little bit tangentially, Drusilla. This Herodian family of Jews who have worked with the Roman Empire after initially being independent, having their own kingdom. The Roman Empire has expanded, it has caught them up, and rather than fight the Romans, which everybody knows how that works out generally up to this point in history, they instead collaborate with the Romans very actively, very intensively, as we're going to see when we start looking through some of these individuals. And Drusilla just happens to be married to this governor of Judea, because this is how, I mean, you're in this strata of aristocracy. But Felix goes away. We now have a new governor, it's Festus. This creates the opportunity for the status quo to change. For the Jews, for Festus, for Paul. So what is going on between Festus and the chief priests and the Jewish leaders? What can we infer based on what we've just read is going on between them? Certain observations we can make about Festus, we can make about this politically loaded situation.
Seems to me that he's now making it, he's taken over as governor. He's going to Jerusalem, he's gonna kind of settle things, you know, I'm in control now, I'm the new guy.
Right.
Any problems?
Right.
And yeah, that guy you got down there is a problem, so seems that's how he gets into it.
So when you're new to a job, do you show up the first day on time? I was new to this job. I was here when the lights were off.
I don't want to take you too far off track if you don't want to follow this, but I'm just curious about the handover from Felix to Festus. Did they know each other? How did this?
Yeah, there's no description of them actually like giving a report one to the other. Now, most likely, it's Roman society at this level, very, very literate, leaving behind records. So probably at the very least, a summary of the situation. here's what I've done, making myself look good. Here's the outstanding issues. This, and this. I'm gonna go to my next position. You get that. As far as we know, they don't talk to each other. From the way Festus behaves both in this chapter and the next chapter, it doesn't seem like he's given a very good report on the patient Judea that he is now in charge of providing for. James.
And if you look in verse 9 where it says he wanted to do the Jews a favor, and then you look in verse 26 where it says I've got nothing to write, he is trying to balance the people he has to govern with his bosses. He doesn't want to completely give in to the people he's governing and say, okay, we'll send this to Caesar, and then have Caesar write back, why did you send me this guy? Why are you wasting my time?
Right. What else can we infer about Festus and how he's administering the situation? There's some interesting specifics that these verses give us.
And he seems to have some insights as to the Jewish intent. And I don't know how he picked that up, whether he got that from the records of Felix or whatever, but because remember, when Felix takes him down, he protects him. He puts all these guards around him, bring him down. He knows somehow he's picked up on the intent. If I bring him back to Jerusalem, I maybe got a problem.
Yeah, the Jews, when Festus goes to Jerusalem, and he's in Caesarea Maritime for 3 days. He lands at the port, he goes to his palace, he gets over his galley leg, travel jet lag, they're on a galley. Sorry. I'm sure he did not smell good. Riding in a galley is not going to be great, it's powered by slaves who nobody's really seeing to their needs. So he gets off the boat, he has 3 days of R&R in his brand new palace, get the lay of it, with that pool, and then he goes straight to Jerusalem. So he's not wasting time. There's a sense that Felix was moving slow on things. He wasn't quite getting enough done fast enough. Paul is an exhibit of that. He's a prisoner. There's no case really against him with evidence. He's a Roman citizen. He's got certain rights, and yet he just languishes there for 2 whole years. New guy comes in. I'm going to show everybody how much I can get done. I'm going to hit the ground running. This is how Alex is going to be president of Walla Walla University. I've seen him so many times since he was announced. He is just hoofing it all over campus, meeting with all kinds of people. Because that's, he's gonna bring speed to the job. Not to suggest that John, in his many years, didn't have speed. John has learned how to pace himself. Alex, I'm sure, will learn how to pace himself too. Don't burn out, Alex. We need you for the long run. Festus here is hitting the ground running. You go straight to the major source of power and potential trouble. Jewish leadership at the center of Judaism, which is in Jerusalem. Get there fast. And then he spends 8 to 10 days with them. And according to Luke, our author for Acts, major topic. First topic the Jews hit him with. There's taxation issues. There's civil rights issues between all the different people groups that live in this area. You have Greeks, you have Jews, you have Hellenized Jews, you have Samaritans. They all have different rights. And the Romans have to administer all of that on top of what the Romans choose to administer. We're going to tax you. We're going to have census for you. These things disrupt everyone, cause problems. Oh, and the Romans are an occupying power. There's a lot of issues they could be talking about. According to Luke, the major agenda item for the Jewish leaders is Paul. He's been out of commission for 2 years, and yet this strongly indicates that he has not been quiet nor inactive while under house arrest, while in witness protection. He remains such a thorn in their side. The new guy shows up, wants to get the lay of the land, and they're shouting at him, according to his his later description of this, Paul, we need to kill this guy. We need to bring him to Jerusalem to stand trial. And as you were suggesting, or actually, no, you were suggesting, there's a sense that Festus is like, wait a second, if I throw this guy to the wolves, they're either gonna kill him on the way, which is their plan, or they're gonna kill him when he gets there, just under the sheer pressure that they could bring, popular pressure to Paul and to Festus, if it's in Jerusalem.
I have to imagine that Festus is new to this job and he's like, I have to establish my place. And I have to make sure that the people that I'm working with here know their place.
Right.
And I'm not just gonna turn this guy over, because that establishes an expectation that then, you know, whatever
What's the next thing they're
willy-nilly
gonna
they
ask
want,
for?
they're gonna come with the next thing. And so he's new to the job, you know, it's kind of like what they teach you in education classes, you know, don't, your first job, don't smile before Thanksgiving, you know? You can't be too accommodating when you first show up, otherwise people are like, hey, the new guy's here and we can get what we want.
Yeah, fresh meat. For Festus, it definitely seems like that is part of the dynamic that is at work here. And there's also just the simple, practical solution that solves this pressure the Jews have placed on him, which he clearly doesn't want to give into first day on the job. And that is logistically, where's Paul? Paul's back at Caesarea Maritime. Where is Festus going next after leaving Jerusalem? He's not going to live in Jerusalem, doesn't want to live in Jerusalem. The power center for the Roman occupation, the safe place is Caesarea Maritime. He wants to go back there. I'm going to meet with you guys. We're going to spend time together. We're going to break bread. We're going to learn from each other. But I'm going back home anyways. That's where Paul's at. Why don't some of you come with me and we can have the trial as soon as possible and get this off of my to-do list and I can get on to all the other things that I need to focus on, be governor of this space. Ultimately, of course, the Jews have to go along with this. Once the trial starts, this is now another courtroom scene for Paul. How is this trial in chapter 25 different from the previous trial that we had under Felix? What's noticeably different about this? Is Paul normally a man of few words because he doesn't like public speaking? Usually Paul has a lot to say and a lot to write, which is why the New Testament is mostly written by Paul. What's different about this trial? Jews make their arguments, charge him with certain things. Here's our list of what they charge him with being guilty of. Going against the law, going against the temple, going against Caesar. At Caesar point, incidentally, is different. That was not emphasized as much before. They'd had 2 years to figure out how can we convince the next person or the next time we get a chance at Paul to really stick it to him. And they've added this politically charged accusation because the penalty for that is death. You challenge the Roman authority, you die a horrible death usually. That's how the Roman Empire works. That's how it stays in power. Problem is, when they give their evidence, there's no evidence for this. So all their evidence is religiously related, which is what Festus says. They didn't say the things I expected them to say. I thought this Paul guy was horrible. I assumed he had done something terrible for all these people to be shouting for his blood. That's one difference. What else is the major difference in this trial versus the previous one? How extensively does Paul defend himself?
He doesn't speak in chapter 25.
He does speak.
Does he?
He gives a defense.
I think all he says is you're wrong.
I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. It's one whole sentence long. Paul's recognizing there's something else going on here. This hints at the previous question of what's going on between Festus and the chief priests and the Jewish leaders, because what's Festus's response to Paul saying with one sentence, I didn't do it? Is Festus listening to that? Does he comment on that? What does Festus next say? Oh,
It sounds like Festus is kind of excited that he doesn't have to deal with it anymore. Go to Caesar.
what does Festus ask Paul?
Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and I'll trial you up there? Or how would that be?
Why does he say that?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Paul's defense. Paul's defense is I didn't do it. There's no evidence. And next,
Sounds like he's trying to wash his hands of it.
who's he spent the last week plus with?
Jewish leaders.
Jewish leaders. How much pressure, how many times have they said, we just want to have the trial in Jerusalem. We just want to have the trial. Just give us the trial in Jerusalem. Paul seems to walk into the room and realize this guy's already made a decision on what he wants to do. I'm not going to do some long appeal. I'm not going to tell some large story. These guys are looking at each other and winking. And sure enough, Festus hits him with, hey, buddy, I just go to Jerusalem. That question by itself tells us a couple things. It hints that there was some agreement beforehand. That Festus has already made up his mind. Him and the Jews he's already willing to sell Paul down the river to make good relationships with the Jews. He doesn't maybe even care what Paul has to say. Paul doesn't waste his breath on it. But he asks, this is a Roman judge, governor of a province, someone with enormous power. He asks Paul, what do you think about going up to Jerusalem? Would you like to do that? Are you stupid enough to say yes to this?
It's just kind of like at a traffic stop, the cop's like, well, you wouldn't mind if I took a look in your trunk, right? I mean,
Right?
just to see what the reaction,
Yeah.
just to see what the reaction is, maybe, and how certain are you that you haven't done anything? Let's test that a little bit.
Well, and he knows the story from the previous, from Felix, how they tried to kill him up there the first time. Paul knows this. And
Yeah,
I
he
would
knows
think-
what going to Jerusalem
Yeah,
means.
as soon as they asked that question, Paul would have a picture in his mind. I see what's going on here. They're back at the same trick again, even though maybe Festus doesn't realize what they're up to. If
Yeah,
I go up there, they're gonna kill
they're
me.
not really there for a trial.
No.
They're there to simply try and get him moved from point A to point B so they can kill him, which was the last secret plot that Paul was made aware of and the Romans were made aware of, and that got us to this point in the first place. So the Jewish playbook here hasn't really changed much. They just see that we've got a new guy who doesn't know what's up. Let's exploit that. Let's get Paul moved and let's kill him.
I'm just trying to figure out why Festus asks and doesn't tell. I have some suspicions.
What are your
I
suspicions?
mean, I'm wondering if maybe there's nothing that says that he has to go to Jerusalem. That's my first thing. My second thing is, does Festus actually realize what this means? That it's a death sentence for Paul? Does he know that Paul knows that it's a death sentence for him? Is he trying to play the Jews by saying, let me see if I can give you what you want, and then knowing all along that Paul, being a Roman citizen, can appeal to something higher. I'm just, it seems to me like he could require it.
Well, this brings us to Paul's response to Festus's question of, hey, you want to just go to Jerusalem? We can do this there. That'd be fun. You like Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
The food's better. There's holidays that happen there. He doesn't go into those details, doesn't try to incentivize this, but he asks, and what's Paul's response?
At the end of it there, he says about handing me over to them. That to me gives me a big hint. One way or another, this isn't gonna work out. Either they'll kill me along the way or hand me over to them and they will kill
He
me.
clearly understood that going to Jerusalem meant handing him over to the Jews,
That sentence for him.
which isn't what Festus asked, but
No,
Paul sees through it. What else from Paul's response do we have? What is he saying there? What role is he playing there?
Like a Roman citizen.
He says, I'm a Roman
That's
citizen.
right.
He speaks like a well-informed Roman citizen.
Right.
He says, I'm already in a court of Caesar, higher court. Why would I go back to a lower court? And if it's determined that I die, I'm fine with dying. But I'm already in Caesar's court. So I'm gonna appeal to Caesar. And then what's Festus's response to that? The back and forth here is really interesting. Actually, before we get to that point, Paul says something to the Roman governor about jurisdiction, about authority. To your point, Sean, why hasn't Festus just said, well, sorry, don't care that you think you're innocent, you're going to Jerusalem? Why did he ask it as a question? The response comes from Paul. It's about authority. Paul boldly speaks to the new Roman governor of this entire province something about authority. What is that?
part I like it, he says, nobody has the right to hand me over.
Who does that? Who's included in nobody?
Him.
Yeah.
Festus, yeah, you don't have the right to do that. Because I'm a Roman citizen.
How well does it work when people who are on trial tell the judge, you don't have authority over me? People try this regularly. How does that usually work? There's a charge, a contempt of court that often comes along with if you push that too far. It is a way of really antagonizing the person whose decision, you're in their hands. So Paul's taking an enormous risk here by telling this person he's just met in this first trial with this new authority figure, I'm sorry, sir, but you don't have the authority to hand me over to them. How does Festus respond to that?
Then he goes to his counsel.
He goes to his counsel. He has to check on that. Is what he said, is that true? Now, Festus is a Roman citizen. He's a high-ranking Roman. He's a successful Roman. That doesn't mean he's an expert in Roman law. And this simple guy in front of him, who's his prisoner, is telling him the law. As a Roman, according to the counselors, Paul is correct. Festus doesn't have the authority to do this. Now, he could order Paul killed right there. But he would have to explain why he just killed a Roman citizen in a Roman courtroom who there was no evidence for even being held as a prisoner. This is a literate record-keeping system. He can't just sweep that under the rug. There's no indication that he wants to do this. The Jews would have been happy with it. They would have they've told Festus, just look that way and we'll take care of this guy in 2 or 3 seconds. But Festus is trapped here. And Paul knows it. But it was a gamble. Anytime you challenge authority that directly, you are taking an enormous risk. Festus's response after meeting with his counselors: you want to go to Caesar? Caesar, you will go. Which incidentally is fulfilling a prophecy that we assume Jesus, or the Lord, who stood with Paul a few chapters earlier, chapter 23:11, said, you're going to need to go to Rome. We are now 2 years later. Paul's been a prisoner. He's been under house arrest. People have tried to kill him multiple times. He hasn't moved an inch towards Rome. And yet, now, because we've changed governors, God's hand seems to be at work in this entire situation. And incidentally, who has brought Paul's case to the top of the priority list for Festus? Was it Paul? He's a prisoner. Nobody's listening to him. Who has brought this about?
The Jewish leaders.
The Jewish leaders. The people that want to kill Paul are being used, and the people that are holding Paul prisoner are also being used to carry out what Jesus predicted Paul needed to do. So next, we transition to new characters being added to this drama. Festus has agreed, you're going to go to Rome. At this point, it appears to be just a matter of logistics. When's the next ship heading to Rome? We get Paul on it. We safely guard him from this very impregnable position through this Roman colony city to the docks. Super simple, super straightforward. He's on a boat to Rome. He'll be there in a couple of weeks. But the story takes a twist. We add new characters to it. We add Agrippa II and his sister Bernice. And this is the family ancestry here of this very interesting family. Picture this from Festus's perspective. He's just come in, he's new to the job, he's trying to keep the Jews happy, he's got this Roman citizen who is telling him what he can and can't do, and he's right. And it looks like he's gonna be able to offload this guy to Caesar. And as James has pointed out, he's gonna have a problem with the messaging that's gonna go to Caesar. I'm sending you this prisoner, and I don't really know why. Now that's gonna make Festus look like he's not a good administrator because he doesn't understand the situation enough to even administer it. That's a problem. His problems get complicated when this well-connected, well-established Jewish family that collaborate with the Romans show up to visit him. Now, he went to the Jewish leaders within 3 days. He was on it. They're doing this power move of, oh, you've been here for 2 weeks. We're going to casually show up to your palace, and we're going to stay for days. This is like the in-laws you do not enjoy coming to visit. This group, you've heard about my reputation, but they're going to be staying. What are we going to talk about? What are we going to do together? But Festus is looking at how he can use this situation, and they are Jewish. And all this stuff that the Jewish leader just brought against Paul that totally confused Festus. I thought it was going to be something serious. It was all this religious nonsense. He now has some high-profile individuals that maybe can give him some insights into this. So in their awkward silence of meeting each other, and the awkwardness is further that this position used to be held by this family. And his predecessor, immediately before him, was married to the sister of these two folks. So they've got family connections, power. He's brand new here. He's out of his depth. So how could he possibly make this global? Oh, hey, I have an interesting case. Paul. Let me tell you about him. How do we make sense of this? And what's Agrippa's response to this story about a random prisoner that was left by the previous governor?
I hear it from his mouth.
I'm gonna talk to him myself. Okay, Festus was right. This was interesting enough to catch his attention. This is the guy, incidentally, who this whole family is really, really interesting. And this is where I will, time permitting, go off in history. Herod the Great. He ruled this area when it was an independent kingdom and then got subsumed into the Roman Empire, starts to work with them. There's a phrase that comes out of Roman history that the only thing worse than being a Roman enemy is a Roman ally. Romans do this throughout their history of rapid expansionism. They make allies and then they gobble up their allies. This becomes true of this family, their kingdom, and we see the interactions fully on display. Herod the Great, we know because Jesus was born. He's in charge and he kills babies. He also kills a number of his family members, including a number of his sons, including Herod Agrippa II's grandfather, who was killed by his dad. Takes up most of his sons until eventually Antipas is left. We hear about him and his wife with Herodias, who had been married to Philip. These are little marriage symbols in case you're wondering what the circles are, that they had wedding rings back then. This was criticized by John the Baptist, which got him arrested and then beheaded. So this family has been integrally woven into the stories that we've been telling throughout the New Testament. And they're very scandalous, to put it mildly. The Kardashians would have to work extremely hard to try and keep up with the drama generated by this family. So we have Herod Agrippa walking into this situation with Bernice, his sister. Speaking of scandal, multiple historians. So we have Luke as one historian, a biblical historian. We have 6 other Roman historians that make mention of these two having an incestuous relationship with each other. So that we can easily stand back and judge this family and like, this is a terrible, terrible family. No way about it. But we also have an interesting psychological example of a trauma-inducing family from the founder sharing that trauma and that trauma being picked up and repeated generation after generation. So that when we get to Bernice, for example, she is well documented in history. And it's all about her love life, which, you know, most people like their love life to be fairly private. Hers is on display for history, and that's really all she's known for. But she's also set up for that by what's happened with her family. So from here on, from Agrippa I on, these family members start getting sent to Rome as children, as hostages, to keep this family and their ambitions in line. This is an old practice that goes all the way back to the Egyptians. We see it in the Old Testament being practiced, where you bring the children of would-be competitors to your power center. You indoctrinate and educate them on your values, your interests, your imperial interests. And then you send them back out to rule once they're adults, and you thereby co-opt the power and the identity of those families, and you bend them to your imperial will. This family has gotten caught up in it. They dove into it in the pursuit of continued power and luxurious lifestyle. And he lived in Rome and he lived in Rome and she lived in Rome, which means they rub shoulders with, they go to schools with, they play in the palaces of Rome with the imperial family members that are way over these guys. These guys are just their administrators. The people that are actually running the Roman Empire, they know them. As there's very high turnover in those imperial positions, they know the people that are getting the position of emperor. They know the people that were on the losing end of the civil wars that are being fought for who's going to be the next emperor. And Agrippa II and Bernice, who are here interviewing Paul. And he's going to have an amazing testimony to share with them in the next chapter. They're together. She is on her, so if we think of him as a husband, he would be about her fourth husband. She was married off at 13. Her husband at that point dies within 2 years, so she's a widower at 15. She's married off to her uncle next, which I would imagine was not her choice, judging by the significant age difference and the fact that they're closely related. She produces in the next 3 years of that marriage 2 children for him, 2 male children. Then he dies. She's now widowed twice. She's not even 20 yet. She has 2 infant children. And she goes back to her brother for protection and a place to live. And they then start having a relationship, whether that's consensual or not, or whether she is the victim of that, we don't know. But she is set up to have a difficult life. Eventually, these two, after their interaction with Paul, their chance to accept the gospel, which they reject, she ends up falling in love with this guy, Titus, who's the son of the Roman general Vespasian, who at this point, we are roughly in 60 AD. Within the next 6 years, there's going to be a huge Jewish revolt that breaks out. So we're going to transition governors. I left out some of the governors, as you can tell by the dates. And these guys, their rule was fairly tame in comparison to one of the next ones that comes, and he really just angers the Jews. He pushes all their buttons, and they revolt. This is the revolt that's been predicted. The Romans arriving has been predicted and then going away, and the Christians are going to need to flee Jerusalem. That's all going to be playing out. And Vespasian, his dad, is sent to put it down, given a huge army to put it down by Nero, Emperor Nero. And Titus brings his army over from Egypt, and him, father and son, start defeating the Jewish rebellion. He falls in love with this powerful Jewish female from this family that's been indoctrinated into Roman life. She's more than a decade older than him. But all accounts say they're in love, they really actually like each other. She's probably playing him for the power that he offers. When Nero dies, Vespasian leaves before the revolt is fully quashed, leaves his son to be in charge of what's left, takes a huge chunk of his army to go and dive into the next Roman civil war, comes out on the winning end of it. Apparently, Bernice helped finance that with her personal wealth from her family ancestry. Her brother is more famous for squandering that wealth. She was better at actually managing it. Titus eventually goes to Rome. She goes with him. Jerusalem gets destroyed. The temple gets destroyed. Judea is not what it once was. They go back to Rome. Eventually, the Roman populace don't like her. She's an Eastern queen. There's this whole stereotype of them, these Eastern women leading the good Roman men into down paths that they shouldn't be going. She becomes a victim of that stereotype. He exiles her for his own political career. His dad then dies. He becomes the emperor. She comes back again. Hey, you're the emperor. You can do whatever you want. Now we can be in love again. He's once again pressured to exile her, exiles her a second time, and then she disappears from historical record. So to try and bring this history lesson to a close for this chapter, there's a contrast between the morality of Paul and the morality of the people that he's in the room with in this chapter. Whether that is the transition from Felix to Festus, whether that's the high priests and the Jewish leaders who are just out for blood, they don't care if he's guilty, or it's this roving Jewish would-be king of the area if he could just get the power back, toady of Rome, and his sister who he's sleeping with. The contrast between these is going to set up the dramatic events of the next chapter. And I'm giving a small spoiler here. Paul is not going to give a one-line defense in the next chapter. Paul is going to give a long and elaborate personal testimony. It will be so effective that this guy will at one point yell at him, "I understand the problem. You are crazy. You've lost your mind." And this guy will say to him, "Are you seriously actually trying to convert me to Christianity?" And yet this setup from this chapter has us positioned to learn something about God, which is that he could have just gotten Paul from point A to point B. "I need you in Rome, get on a ship, go to Rome." God's timing is different than our timing. Paul sat in prison for 2 years wondering, is he ever going to get out? He could literally have been stuck there the rest of his life had this opportunity not come about the way it came about, and it wasn't even Paul who initiated it. It was the Jewish leaders who wanted him dead. And God is going to reach out to all of these people involved, even the most obvious, licentious, deep sinning, completely compromised, generationally compromised individuals. And in his love is going to reach out to them and offer them the same thing he's going to offer to anybody else, which is, here is this message of love, of doing things differently. And you have a chance to accept it just like everybody else. And this family that's basically been interacting with Jesus since he was born. Herod could have been sitting at the stable when Jesus was born and worshiping him. Turned his life around. Each of them in their turn, Herod Antipas could have listened to John the Baptist and been one of Jesus's first disciples. And still, God, generation after generation, is reaching out to give them a chance and an opportunity. But that's more of what we have to look forward to in the next chapter. All right. Malcolm, I know your name. Would you be willing to close us with prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to come together and to understand more your working in the lives of each one of us, and the grace that you continue to show everyone, regardless of our decisions, to keep on trying. We ask that we will respond to your call, listen to your timing, and be willing to follow your lead. Amen.
Thank you all for being here and have a happy Sabbath. Thank you for tolerating me not being out.